Hey, welcome back to another great RC Worst YouTube video. Today we are going to be talking about hiring a well pump installer or well pump service technician. It's a question that comes up a lot. Obviously, we're based here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and so a lot of you folks watching these videos have to hire people wherever you're located, of course. I just kind of wanted to talk about, and I thought it would be valuable for you as the homeowner to know just some things to consider, some things to discuss with the potential installer that you're looking to hire. So the goal here, of course, is to get the most value, the most bang for your buck when hiring an installer. So hopefully these tips in this short video will help you along in that hiring process and ultimately lead you to a quality installation and where you felt like you saved some money possibly in the process, or at the very least are having some expectation and standard for the installation. So let's jump into the little slideshow that we've got prepared here and get to going through it. So just to get the conversation going, we want to talk about, how many years, get an idea of experience. How many years have you been installing pumps? I mean, obviously that's research that you can do on your own when you're vetting companies, looking through Google or whatever source you're going to be using, or it can be done in a conversation with the individual. It's always important to ask if they're licensed, bonded. Oftentimes a pump installer is not going to have anything but perhaps an electrical license, possibly a plumbing license, depending on where you live. But just knowing that they've done their paperwork, that they're really adds to the legitimacy of the business and assures yourself that you're not going to be dealing with somebody that's going to potentially end up in an unprofessional situation. So it's also nice to get a timeline of your project. So how long would you anticipate it to be for the project to be completed, or how available is the installer? Oftentimes when we're looking at replacing a well pump, we're sitting there without water in our house or for our crops, cattle, livestock, etc. There's typically a need. It's not something you want to wait around for. That does seem like an obvious question, but it can be important before you just call the first guy in the phone book or the first guy that pops up on your list and say, hey, I want you to get out here. You might be able to find somebody a little bit sooner, which obviously has a lot of value when you're making that decision. If you're in a situation where perhaps you're concerned about your finances and the availability of funds to get a project like this done, I would say on average right now, in our area, obviously this is going to vary widely all across the country, but here in little old Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, it's probably anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 on average to have a well pump replaced. And you just want to be aware of that. And also the question, any additional charges, oftentimes replacing a well pump or hiring a contractor to install a new well pump on, let's say, a new project, a new well, etc. Those are things that you want to kind of coordinate. What components does this include? If there's any extras, how are we going to deal with that in the billing process? How we deal with that as a company. All of our work is typically, especially in replacements, is typically time and materials. So if we go out to the job site, maybe we find a bad control box, maybe we find a bad well pump, bad wire, bad pipe, check valves, etc. We're going to replace as necessary and only bill you for the parts we use and the time it takes us to install those. Some contractors may operate a little bit differently. I think the thing to be wary of is contractors that will replace things that may not necessarily need to be replaced, and sometimes they'll talk to you about, well, I'm not going to be able to warranty this if you don't allow me to replace these components, et cetera, et cetera. So asking the question of, let's say they need to replace the motor. Well, if they don't replace the pump because maybe you bought it only a couple of years ago, then are you going to warranty the labor on replacing the motor, et cetera? So you'll have to decide whether you go ahead and replace the recommended components in order to get their warranty on labor, if they offer that. And so that conversation is helpful to have before you go ahead and have somebody do the work, as opposed to after, when you find out that maybe things aren't going to go your direction because of XYZ. Another one here is if there are any disagreements, how are we going to resolve them? So that's more of an internal thing with yourself. I think that my advice on knowing whether a company is upstanding is pretty simple. It can be handled in a couple of ways. For me, I rely pretty heavily on looking at reviews of the company. It seems like Google reviews is one of the most commonly accessible and consistent format for that. So taking a look at those reviews and determining if they do have negative reviews, how they responded, how they reacted to those. And perhaps even if you're really concerned or questioning a situation, first off, probably look for somebody else. But if you're wanting to continue to explore that, you can always approach somebody. But you've got to understand there's two sides to every story. So just being aware of the potential for a breakdown in communication, usually you can get pretty good indicators in the reviews. So, and I would say that a lot of people that watch the videos that we put out, we talk a lot about quality products. We talk a lot about what brands to look for. And I think that now that we've got such availability through online research to determine what products are superior and what products are inferior, asking the questions, what brand pump and motor do you use? What brand of hardware are you using as far as check valves, et cetera, et cetera. Those of you that it's important to have a quality installation, it's also equally as important for you to have that conversation with your installer to relay that, look, I'm not looking to pinch pennies here. I don't want this pump out of here, or I don't want to have this pump pulled again anytime soon, so I'd prefer that we use good components. And unfortunately, when you've got a system that's potentially hundreds of feet underground, one weak link in that chain can ultimately cause a failure that requires everything to come out again. And that's where the bulk of your expenses are, is putting the pump in and pulling the pump out when you're hiring someone and paying for a hoist truck to do that work. So being aware of those components, in my view, are important. So again, if that's an important thing for you to know that you're getting quality products and not just something that's the cheapest of the cheap, but it also helps on the other side of the conversation. Let's say you're comparing multiple contractors for a project, and you've got bid A, bid B, and one guy's coming in $500, $1,000 cheaper, or estimates, even verbal ballpark estimates. You can help bridge that gap and understand why bid A is so much cheaper than bid B by simply discussing what products are you using, and then understanding what's the warranty on these products. You can also shop the products yourself and determine, looking at reviews, looking at price points, which product seems to be a superior product. And obviously there's a spectrum when it comes to quality, right? So you've got the most expensive products, the highest quality products, and then you've got, of course, the opposite end of that spectrum. And it's all about, in my perspective, the most bang for your buck. So even though you could theoretically spend $10,000 on a project that someone else could do for $1,000, it probably doesn't make sense to go with, oh, well, I want the best, I want the most expensive. What you really want is the most value, and where we know the cheapest option is inevitably going to fail in a short period of time, but the most expensive option is probably going to peak out at maybe the higher end of the range. But if you go somewhere in the middle, or even the low middle or the high middle, depending on what your personal preferences are, you can probably expect about the same life expectancy of the product with minimal risk. So it's in a lot of ways, it's risk assessment, risk evaluation when you're making a decision on how much money you're really ready to invest in a project. And I think that this is just generic information that applies to almost anything when you're talking about, well, fixing your car or building a home. You've got to kind of decide where you want to be with what you spend and what quality you're willing to accept in order to accomplish your personal goals. So, and some additional things to consider is, you know, understanding what work they're going to be doing. So if you have someone that's replacing a pump or installing a new pump, perhaps we've talked about this in the past, you have the well driller's report or well log, as it's often called. Um, Knowing what depth the pump is at now, if there isn't a pump, how deep the well is, what the static water level is. Typically, if you have a deep enough well and you have enough room, then, or enough static rather, then you want to have the pump like 10, 15 feet off the bottom at a minimum. If you don't have a lot of static, let's say you've only got 15, 20 feet of static in the well, um, you probably can't afford to have the pump 15 feet off the bottom or 10 feet off the bottom, depending on the situation. So it is very situational, but what you don't want is a pump that's so far down close to the bottom of the well that it's pulling up a bunch of crud, sediment, then that's getting into the house. And then option A is add a filtration system. Option B is raise the pump up a little bit higher and hopefully avoid having that much sediment coming in the house. And that's also going to, an installer that's able to answer questions like this is more likely to be in tune with their profession and be able to provide you a more quality installation, having known what they're doing. Another thing that I think is personally that you don't ever want to skimp on is the wire. Fortunately, if you select, for example, heavy duty flat jacketed cable, the flat jacketed cable is typically going to have a double coating. It's going to have the red, yellow, black, green with the PVC coating, and then it's going to have an external jacketing around that that are going to contribute to longer life. Wire unto itself is typically a 20 plus year product. With this heavy duty wire, it can come out of the well and be reused over and over again. So I almost think of that as like a 40-year product. But it's those little things, those links in the chain that make the system, and where you want to spend your money smart. And I think that the flat jacketed wire is a good thing to consider. But finding out again when we're comparing and contrasting estimates from different vendors, different installers, what components are they using, all the way down to the wire. The wire is not an inexpensive part of a project, so that could easily be attributed to a big difference in price between option quote A and quote B, as we discussed, where one installer is using twisted, which is kind of the classic well pump cable, or flat jacketed cable. But there's a situation for, or rather, there's a time and a place to use less expensive cable. Let's say you've got a 30-foot deep well. Well, we're talking about maybe $50 in cable, versus $70 in cable. Is it really that big of a deal either way? No. And in that scenario, you darn near could pull the pump out yourself by hand, and so it's apples to oranges in that scenario. And when we're talking about time frame on a project, do you have the materials on hand? If an installer doesn't keep pumps on hand, doesn't keep wire, doesn't keep pipe on hand, not only does that mean that your project is potentially going to be down the road, but it could also potentially impact warranties or issues or services in the future. Knowing that you've got an installer that keeps materials on hand is a really good indicator that they're going to be responsive. And if you call somebody at 7 o'clock at night because you're out of water, or you call somebody on a weekend because, again, you're out of water, the guy that has the stuff to make the repairs can come out and make the repairs. But the guy that doesn't have the availability of the materials, he may come out, but it's almost a wasted trip, and you're probably going to inevitably be the one paying for it if he doesn't have the right stuff to do the job. Oftentimes, issues with wells are pretty diagnosable over the phone. I would say 9 times out of 10. I've had many videos talking about how to troubleshoot a well. I can't tell you how many times I've taken a phone call from somebody experiencing well issues, and Again, 9 times out of 10, with just a couple of quick questions answered, I can determine what the problem is without using a meter, without being on site. And that just comes with understanding of how these systems operate and what causes what to fail. So that all kind of ties into, do you really want to pay for a wasted trip? Probably not. So hopefully just some of these tips here are helpful. And, you know, ultimately you really want to have a good experience, and especially when you're spending the kind of money that you're spending on either replacing a pump or installing a pump, really weigh your options. If it really isn't that big of a deal to you, you're probably not watching this video to begin with. But if you're looking to make educated decisions, always remember that the sales guys and myself are always here at RC Worsting Company. Give us a call. We're happy to answer your questions, happy to help you evaluate your local installers. Also happy to give you an estimate on materials if you can find an installer willing to install our materials. At the very least, an estimate's going to help keep your local guy honest, fair, and competitive in his pricing, and might save you some money even by just getting a competitive estimate from us. So bear that in mind, and don't forget to have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Also, like and subscribe for more great content. We will catch you next time.